Hello. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our first in a series of Facebook Live sessions from the TCU Office of Admission. My name is Heath Einstein, and I have the pleasure of serving TCU as Dean of Admission. I want to start tonight, or today, depending on where you are, with a land acknowledgement. This is how we do all of our programs in the TCU Office of Admission. We gratefully acknowledge the space where we are in, and on this land, Native peoples have been since time immemorial. And in particular, where TCU is located is the ancestral homeland of the Wichita and affiliated tribes. And so we are forever grateful. This is a Facebook Live session. This is the March session. It's a first in what we will do on a monthly basis. So I want to start by just answering a basic question: why are we doing this? And the answer is, this is a great medium for us to connect with you. And whether you are a student or a parent or a counselor or some other interested party, and you want to know about the college admission process, and in particular, the college admission process at Texas Christian University, we want to be as transparent as possible. We've used this format before, this Facebook Live, over the last couple of years, a few times, and they've been really successful. We've had a lot of fun with it. It's a great way to connect with people. We can answer your questions in the moment. We can explain things in ways that are sometimes a little bit more difficult to do in an email response or in a blog post. Sometimes just having this sort of interaction can be really helpful. So every month we are going to choose a new topic or a new set of topics, and I'll have some prepared remarks on those topics, very loosely scripted. So mostly I'm just doing this off the cuff because I think it's more interesting that way and more fun and more real, more authentic. And so we'll make sure that we cover those particular areas for sure. However, the time that we spend together is not necessarily limited to those topics. So while I'll be speaking for a few minutes tonight on the topics of standardized tests in college admission and campus visits and how you might make the most of a campus visit, if you've got questions related to anything else, I'm certainly happy to answer those. It was really fun to see where people are joining us from already. As you were posting, I noted we've got folks here from Minnesota, from Georgia, from my home state of California, and yes, I'm a huge Lakers fan, so I hope I have fellow Lakers fans out there with me. Idaho and Washington and Connecticut, and we even have someone joining us from Vietnam, so good morning to you. And all over the place as well. So I'm really excited, and I think that's a great place to start because it's rather reflective of the TCU community. Every year in our entering first year class, we have, roughly speaking, 50% of the students from the state of Texas and 50% of the students coming from outside the state of Texas. And to me, going to college is largely about connecting with people who don't necessarily share your worldview, don't necessarily share your life experience. And so coming into an environment where you see people who look different and think differently and act differently and just approach life from a totally different point of view is a really great way to experience college. And that is absolutely what you're going to get when you are at TCU. So again, this is scheduled for an hour. We'll see how it goes. If it lasts a little longer, great. If it lasts less than an hour, that's okay too. I also want to start by offering a couple of thank yous. Rob Berline from Alumni Relations at TCU, Amy Peterson in our Marketing and Communication Division, and Mandy Castro, Director of Admission. They're all helping behind the scenes right now. You don't see them or hear them, but they're really making this all run. And then I also want to acknowledge Liz Rainwater, who's Director of Admission, Marketing, and Communication, who helped put together the graphics, some of the graphics that you will see, and did so much to promote this event. So a lot of help. This is not, it's not just this pretty face, believe me. Okay, so let's start by talking a little bit about standardized tests. And standardized tests in college admission get a lot of attention. And they probably, frankly, get too much attention, because the reality is that how a student performs on one day in their junior or senior year of high school is not telling us all that much about how the student is going to perform in college. And so I think that there is typically outsized influence, or certainly the perception of outsized influence, standardized tests in the admission process, as well as scholarships, earning academic scholarships at the colleges that you may be applying to. Of course, now during a global pandemic, standardized tests are getting a lot of attention. In the wake of COVID-19, which we're now coming up on about the year anniversary as far as the impact starting in major waves in this country, we noticed that the ACT and SAT administrations were beginning to be canceled left and right. And so fairly early on, TCU decided that we were going to do away with the requirement that students submit standardized tests for consideration for admission. And that went against the grain from our historical requirement. But the reason why we did that is because we knew that students were not going to be able to very easily sit for the exams. And we didn't know how long these cancellations would extend. If last spring we knew that the pandemic was going to end during the summer, maybe we would have drawn a different conclusion. But because there was so much unknown, at a time where there was a lot of instability, uncertainty, and frankly, people were frightened, and with good reason, we felt it was really important that we send a message to our community that this is one less thing you have to worry about. So don't worry about taking the test. If it's offered and you want to take it, great. We will look at it, we will consider it. But if you chose not to take it, or if you took it but weren't comfortable with the scores that you got, we were going to be in a test optional environment for the class that was that is applying right now. So the current class of high school seniors, the class of 2021, or as I like to call it, the TCU class of 25. Now, it's important to know that test optional is not actually a new phenomenon in college admission. It actually goes back quite a ways. In the late 1960s, Bowdoin College became the first school that had required tests and then became test optional. And so for more than 50 years, that college, which is considered a very fine institution up in Maine, they have not required standardized tests, and they've just done just fine in enrolling strong classes every year. And slowly but surely over time, more and more schools had adopted a test optional policy. Some schools even go so far as to have what's called a test-free policy, or some people call it test blind. And what that means is, even if you take an SAT or an ACT and you submit the score will not be considered for admission or scholarship. Most schools that don't require testing have that test optional policy, where you could submit it, it could be considered, but it is entirely up to the student as to whether or not they submit that. There's a really good website called fairtest.org out there, and they track with precision which colleges are test optional, and if they are test optional or test free, what their specific policies are. They have links to the websites of the colleges. And we're at a point now where there are well over 1,000 schools that are test optional. An interesting question is, what's going to happen once the pandemic is in the rear view mirror? Well, first of all, it's important to know that many colleges have started to come out and tell families what the test optional policies are going to be for next year. For example, at TCU, we have recently announced, and we actually just put a blog up about this, we have decided that we are going to be test optional for the next 2 admission cycles beyond this one. Okay, so for current high school juniors and current high school sophomores, when you apply to TCU, you will not be required to submit standardized tests. Um, Over the course of the last year, we've done a lot of research into schools that have been test optional for a longer period of time than we have been. And the results are encouraging in terms of being able to enroll classes that meet the strategic objectives of the institution, um, in lots of different ways, including making sure that we're still enrolling students of a really high quality, because we know that grades earned in a rigorous course load day in and day out over the course of 4 years of high school is really the best measure of how likely a student is to be successful once they get to college. Um, the other thing is that there has historically been quite a bit of inequity in standardized tests. And so, in our ongoing quest to make sure that we are enrolling a class of students that is reflective of the wonderful diversity that we see in the United States and indeed in the entire world, um, we think that there's good reason to rethink whether having standardized tests ultimately is going to be part of our approach anyway. Again, lots and lots of colleges have done away with that. Now, I think there's a question that naturally emerges from students and from parents when you say we are test optional, and that is, okay, do you really mean that you're optional? I mean, is optional really optional? And the answer is, yeah, it is. And the reason why it is because, as I said, the data sort of show that we can meet objectives while having a test optional policy, and we will promote an idea that we're doing something and then in practice do something completely different. In fact, we are not quite finished with our review of our applicant pool for this year, although we're getting closer to the end. The students who applied regular decision, by the way, if that's you, you're going to hear very shortly from us within the next couple of weeks. But what we know already is there's some really encouraging data that we have found so far in our own applicant pool. About 42%, 42, 43% of students who have applied to TCU up to this point have submitted test scores. Interestingly, that varies quite a bit by region. And it reflects of the approaches that each state has taken to handling the pandemic. So, for example, we have seen that students from California will submit test scores at a much lower rate than students from other parts of the country. This is not surprising if you observe how the state of California is navigating the pandemic. This is not a commentary on whether one state is doing it correctly or incorrectly, but merely an observation as to what outcomes are as a result of that. So far, again, encouraging news when we look at our own data. 5,000 students have been admitted to TCU already without us using the test score in our consideration of their applications. This is, by the way, out of a little more than 7,000 students who have been admitted to TCU so far through one of our early rounds. We have both early decision, that is a binding application, and early action, that's a non-binding application. So that's a pretty high percentage of students who have been admitted without using test scores. Now, let me take a step back before I'm gonna add a couple of interesting, I think, statistics here. What we've done with our test optional policy is we have approached this in a way using what we're calling a do no harm approach. And what we mean by do no harm is that the submission of tests cannot hurt you in the review of your application. So if we feel like, and if the data show that the ACT or SAT result that you share with us is supporting your application, is going to add to it, will be a positive in our analysis in in observing other elements of your application and how it all fits together, then we're going to use the score. So it will help you. If, on the other hand, the score that you submit to us, if you choose to submit, does not support your candidacy, then we're essentially going to ignore it. We're going to say we've got enough information with the rest of the application to make an informed decision. And that really gets to the heart of the matter when it comes to standardized tests, which is they are not the be all and end all of our analysis. It is part of a larger understanding of a student's likelihood to succeed. So we employ something called a holistic evaluation um, process when we're reviewing applications. And you'll find that at most selective institutions, they take this holistic approach. And what that means is we're not just looking at one factor or two factors, right? We're not going to just say, okay, your GPA is here, your test score is here, and therefore the matrix will tell us what to do. Instead, we're going to consider every element of the application that you send to us. That includes letters of recommendation. It includes your co-curricular achievements. It includes the essay that you will write as part of your application, and other factors as well. And what it also means is that for every student, the relative weight of each of those things is going to be a little bit different. Some students really shine in one way and maybe don't shine in another way. And we always want to paint students in the best light possible. Okay, so that's holistic in a nutshell. The academic piece is one piece of that. It's the most important piece, though. I want to be clear about that. And most colleges will tell you that because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we are enrolling students to TCU who are going to be successful here. Successful in all sorts of ways, but not the least of which is in the classroom. So we want to know that the student is going to be able to succeed in the classroom. So we have this academic assessment, which is a pretty big part of our overall analysis when we're reviewing students for admission. The test scores are one piece of that. Okay, so like SAT equals 75% of the decision that we make. It is one piece of one piece. The absence of those test scores simply means that we're going to amplify the other pieces of the academic portion of our review. So that means the grades that the student has earned, the courses that the student has taken in which those grades were earned, the school environment, and we get to know the schools pretty well. And by the way, if you didn't know, every high school will send us what's called a profile, which is like a brochure, usually somewhere between 2 and 4 pages, that gives us a lot of information. The schools we know very well because we've worked with them year after year after year. The profile is somewhat helpful. The schools that we don't know especially well, the profiles are exceptionally helpful. And then we also get to know the schools with by the relationships that we have with the counselors at every one of those schools. So I digressed a little bit, but I think that was important to understand our do no harm policy and how this all fits together. So already, as I mentioned, a lot of students have been admitted through our early rounds using without us using test scores. $36 million in scholarships. $36 million in scholarships have already been awarded to students whose test scores weren't used. Okay, so not only does the absence of test scores not hurt you in terms of admission to the university, but it also means that we are going to consider you for academic scholarship even without scores. If you're a great student, if you have proven day in and day out that you are an A student and you've earned those A's in tough courses that challenge you every day, some advanced coursework, some honors, some APs or IBs or whatever system your school uses, we are going to acknowledge that through the awarding of an academic scholarship. And that's our way of saying you have earned this scholarship and we want you to come to TCU. Of course, everyone we offer admission to, we want to come to TCU. And then finally, 2/3 of admitted students were awarded an academic scholarship without using test scores. So again, it's a similar stat, but just a different way to look at it. The bottom line with all of this stuff is you're not going to be penalized in our process if you choose not to submit a test score. Now, you might wonder, should I take the test? And that's a good question. I think the answer depends on a lot of different factors. And we also put a blog post up about this, sort of the top 5 reasons you might want to test or the top 5 reasons you might not want to test. So I'll highlight a couple that that sort of just pop into my head. One reason to test is because while I've been telling you all this stuff about TCU and hopefully made you even more excited to come to the university, not every college is the same. Not every college has the same policies. And you don't want to shut yourself off from the possibility of being in consideration for admission to another school who may not have a test optional policy. So one reason to sit for an exam is to just sort of leave your options open. Another reason to sit for an exam is some colleges, including TCU, will use some of those results for test placement or for class placement. So I'll give you an example. If you're coming to TCU and you want to take a math class as part of your core curriculum requirement, you might be able to, with a certain score on the math section of the ACT or the SAT, basically test into a higher level math class. This is particularly important for students who are coming into the Neely School of Business who have very specific math course requirements that they're going to have to take. So by the way, if you're an admitted business student and you plan to enroll, you can expect to get a message from us shortly before you actually come to TCU, and we're going to have you take a placement exam if you did not submit test scores, just so we can place you properly, and because ultimately we want to make sure that the students who enroll at TCU are really successful. So lots of good reasons to take the test. Why might you not take the test? Because you're not a good test taker and you don't want to sit, and it really causes a great deal of anxiety, and you know that the schools that you want to look at are not going to require testing, and you just say, forget it. I just know that the other parts of my application are really strong. I know my testing is not going to be good. I would prefer not to sit for it and not to invest the time and the money, because it's expensive, to take the test and possibly retake the test. So you might say to yourself, you know what, I'm not going to do it. And that's okay too. So again, on our blog, we've got a list of reasons why you might take it, why you might not take it. And I would encourage you to review that as you're making your decision. Okay, let's transition quickly and talk about campus visits. Because a big part of the college search is doing those campus visits. And you know, the campus visit can be a really important time in a student's journey, because ultimately you're going to be spending 4 years, hopefully just 4 years, on a college campus, and you want to make sure that this is going to be a really comfortable environment for you. We have lots of ways that you can connect with us, but there probably is no better way than visiting a campus. So I want to give you sort of a few pointers as to how you might do that. And I'm going to be talking sort of generically as if there wasn't a pandemic going on right now, but also know that there are some colleges that are open for visits right now. For example, TCU is open for visits, and I'm going to talk about that in a couple of minutes. But generally speaking, I think it's a great idea to visit a college campus and start by looking at a campus or two that are nearby to where you live, before you invest lots of time and money to travel all around. It's a good idea to see a couple of types of schools. Go to a small school and go to a big school. Go to a school that's near a city or in a city, and go to a school that has a more remote geographic location. And just so you get a sense of the kinds of institutions that might be really comfortable for you, because you don't want to spend thousands and thousands of dollars going to all schools that are really similar to one another, and then you discover, nah, that's not really the kind of school I like. So I would start locally, because no matter where you live, the chances are good that there are at least a handful of schools nearby. And who knows, you might actually discover a school that you really like that you had no idea you were interested in. Once you decide where you're going to go, make sure you're not just doing sort of a drive-by visit. You hear students all the time talking about, well, I just knew. I stepped foot on the campus and I knew, or I drove through and I just knew this wasn't going to be the right place. First of all, that aha moment where the heavens open up and tell you this is absolutely where you are preordained to be, that's not actually common. It does happen, but if it doesn't happen for you, don't feel bad, because that's not the more common way. More commonly, you go visit colleges, you see some that seem pretty cool, you see some that you're not really interested in, and you probably have a set of schools where you say, I could probably be okay here. I like it here. It's pretty rare that you walk up and you say, this is it, I'm done. This is where I absolutely have to go. By the way, if that does happen to you, make sure you see what that college's admission policy is. They may have something called early decision, that binding application, and that may be the time for you to consider early decision. At any rate, I wouldn't do the drive-by. Most college campuses have a visit program run through the Office of Admission that is at a minimum comprised of an information session that's led by an admission counselor. Sometimes some colleges will have current students lead those sessions, but usually it's from an admission counselor. That could be anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes. And then you'll go on a campus tour. And the campus tours are usually somewhere between 60 and 75 or maybe even 90 minutes, depending on the size of the campus. So at a minimum, we're talking about a 2-hour commitment on that campus. If you're going to spend the time going all the way to a college to visit it, I would plan to spend a little bit more time than just the minimum 2 hours. Make sure that you have an opportunity to eat on the campus or at an eatery on the edge of campus. That's a great way to get a feeling for the people. People just sort of walk in, you'll overhear conversations, you'll sometimes get a really good vibe for the place. Check out flyers that are listed, that are posted around campus. If the school has an in-print newspaper, and I realize that's largely from a bygone era, but if they've got newspapers that have been printed and that are done by the students, I think it's a great idea to read a newspaper while you're there, or at least give you some reading material for the drive or plane ride home. Again, you're trying to get a sense of what are the students like here? What are they talking about? What are the big issues on campus? Those are often introduced in a student publication. Spend some time in a department that interests you. Sometimes you can schedule that in advance with the Office of Admission. Oftentimes, it may just be you walking into that department. So you can get a campus map and ask, hey, where is the Department of Sociology? Or where is the Department of Physics? I'd like to just stop by, walk around, talk to students, maybe hook up with a professor while I'm there. So that's a good thing to do. So instead of that minimum 2 hours, I would say spend a half day on each college campus if you can. The other thing you should absolutely do, talk to current students, and not just the tour guides. Okay, so we have a wonderful group of interns in the Office of Admission at TCU, and they do an outstanding job at giving tours and really showcasing the university. They've got lots of great information, but understand that on every college campus where there are tour guides, whether they're paid or unpaid, they're being trained to tell you something about the university in the way that the university wants you to know. Okay, I freely admit that. We want to showcase all the great things about TCU. Doesn't mean we're not being inauthentic, and it doesn't mean we're not going to tell you the truth. And if you ask us pointed questions, we will answer them. So all of that is true. But you also want to talk to people who aren't hired by the university to talk about the place. And they'll give you the truth. They'll talk to you about what's happening, what they like and what they don't like. I'm really confident in saying that because I know that when you come to TCU and you talk to our current students, more often than not that every student is in love with the place, but most students are, and most students think it's just amazing, and you'll get a really positive vibe from our student body. So I would recommend that you do that on any college campus. I think it's just a sort of a useful tip. I would also suggest students, if you're going with a parent or a guardian, that you might consider, if the school will allow it, for you to separate and go on different tours. Or at the very least, if you're on the same tour, maybe not converse while the tour is going on. You really want to develop your own perception of the place, and then in the car ride back home, or to return the rental car at the airport, you can start to have that conversation. What did you think? What did you see? Let's compare notes. I think sometimes separating for a good period of time and developing an independent way to look at a school can be really, really helpful. Um, okay, a question that I often get is, do I need to visit the school? How important is that from an admission standpoint? Um, there is a concept in admissions that you may have heard of called demonstrated interest. That is that at some colleges, they will actually track the contact that a student has with the institution. And sometimes that demonstration of interest, whether it is a campus visit or responding to an email that we send or meeting with us on a at a college fair or when we're visiting your college, that those are demonstrations of interest. And when it comes time to reviewing a student for admission, wouldn't it help if we knew that you're really interested in our institution? Like, if TCU is my top choice school, don't you want to know that? And maybe by demonstrating interest, you can do that. And the answer is, like most questions, it depends. It really depends from college to college. At our institution at TCU, we do track the contact that we have with students. And I would say in the admission process, that demonstration of interest is used to sort of break ties. Not that we ever have ties, but sort of metaphorically. That is, if a student is sort of borderline and we're not sure what to do, but they have said to us in many different ways, this is where I want to be, I just can't imagine myself anywhere else, then that can be helpful. If a student is um, totally qualified for admission, let's say they're such a strong student, it's the kind of student we would be giving an academic scholarship to, but they didn't visit campus, that is not going to in any way impact the decision. We're not going to not admit a student just because they didn't visit the campus. And likewise, if a student visited campus, but they're not qualified for admission, then it doesn't really matter. Like, so again, that sort of that demonstrated interest really comes into effect toward the tail end, as we're as in the 11th hour trying to figure out, okay, who are going to get these last spots. So the reason to visit a college really primarily should be so that you can learn more about us, not so that you can impress us in any way, but really to continue doing that, those inquiries. Okay, so what about during the pandemic? Because I'm talking largely about what we do during non-COVID times. What about during the pandemic? Well, we actually, as I mentioned, are open. We opened up, or I should say, reopened. That We reopened in late June, and we opened up in a modified way by scaling back the number of people that we would have in our building at any given time, and a number of people who are going to be on the tours at any given time. We do require students and parents and anybody on in our building to wear masks while they're on campus, and we take temperatures. So we are following the public health guidelines that have been provided, and making sure that we are having an experience not only for our guests, but of course our staff and everyone else in our campus community that is really as safe as possible for everybody. So we have been conducting information sessions and tours now for the last 9 months, and they've been really successful. In fact, we are basically booked solid through the end of April. It's a problem because not everyone who wants to visit campus can right now, but it's a good problem to have. And we're in the process of thinking through how we can open up for some more visits. Primarily, we're looking to do that for our admitted seniors. Because if you're a senior in high school, you really do need to get to TCU to see if, okay, is this a place that I plan to commit to for the next 4 years? If you're not a senior yet, if you're a junior or sophomore and you've been really trying hard to visit TCU, I would ask you to just be a little bit patient. Your time to shine is coming up. After May 1st, once the seniors have decided where they're going to be going to college, we will open up again for our juniors and underclassmen. And the late spring and summer is going to be a fine time to visit campus, and the tours will be all yours. The other thing to keep in mind for those of you who may be concerned about traveling, and we fully appreciate that the pandemic isn't behind us, we feel really good about where we're going to be in a couple of months in terms of the way the vaccinations are going, being administered, and so you might choose not because you can't get here, but because you don't really feel comfortable being here, and that's okay. We anticipate being in a different place in a couple of months, and I think everyone should feel comfortable by that point. So if you go on our website to our visit page, you're going to see lots of different options, lots of different ways that a student can connect with us. You can connect with us online. We have lots of virtual programming that we have done and are continuing to do. You can schedule that visit online virtually. Those include student panels, student to student panels. So if you want to talk to current TCU students, it's a great way to learn more. There are departmental visits that we offer. So if you want to know more about a particular area of academic interest, you can click on there. And then those are those academic sessions. And then we've got admission sessions where it's an admission remarks, about 30 minutes where we're just giving you sort of the ins and outs of the admission process. So lots of ways that you can connect with us there, even if you can't do that in person. We also have a YouTube online tour. And then I want to let you know that within about 2 or 3 weeks, we should have a really exciting new online tour through a company called UVisit. And it's not available yet, but just sit tight. You're going to find out more about it real soon. And it is takes you all over campus. It's interactive. You sort of go at your own leisure, and you can click and learn a lot more about different spots and different programs that occur in those places with panoramic views and 360-degree views. And it's going to be really, really cool. So lots of choices, lots available to you right now, and then coming up in the not too distant future. Okay, I have already talked for a long time. I know you've got lots and lots of questions. So I want to start, first of all, before we even launched tonight, we had posed the question or posed an opportunity on Instagram for you to ask questions in advance. So I did want to mention that one user had asked, ED, which means early decision, offered less merit money than EA, early action, with the same transcripts. That is a great question, and it's one that we get from time to time. And the answer is, I can understand why a student or a parent might think that, because if you apply early decision, you're committing yourself to TCU. So from our perspective, what would the incentive be to give you some academic scholarship when we know you're coming anyway, right? And the answer to that is that would be really unethical of us to do. And so we treat all of our students, regardless of application round, exactly the same when it comes to our awarding academic scholarship. Okay, so if your credentials have earned you some amount of merit money from us, it doesn't matter when you submit your application, and it doesn't matter whether it is a binding or non-binding application. That is, you'll get the same amount no matter what. Okay, another Instagram user, Megan, asks, when should RD hear back? RD is regular decision. The deadline to apply to TCU by that regular decision or final deadline was February 1st. We are aiming to get those decisions out at the end of next week. I say aiming because you're probably aware that we had a really nasty winter storm here about 2 weeks ago that completely shut down the state, basically, for a whole week. TCU was not in session. All classes and university activities were canceled for an entire week. And so we lost quite a bit of productivity during that week because many of our admission officers were without power and without water. And so we've been hustling over the last week to try to catch up. Our goal is to get out decisions late next week. It's possible it will spill into the early part of the following week, but I would say within 2 weeks from right now, every student who applied regular decision by our deadline will hear back from us one way or another. A comment on that, though, that triggered a thought in my head, and Megan, I really appreciate you asking me that question. Students who apply for early decision at TCU will hear back from us by January 1st, often much earlier than that. and they will get one of the following two decisions. Either they will be admitted to TCU or they will be denied admission to TCU. Early action students, those who apply early um, by but have not committed themselves to enrolling if they are admitted, those students will also hear back from us by January 1st, but they could get one of three decisions. And by the way, Carla, I see your question. The class of 2022 applications for early action will open up August 1st. The three possible decisions that a student could receive from us if they apply early action is the student could be admitted, which is great. We throw the confetti in the air. The student could be denied, and unfortunately, that's our way of saying you're probably better suited going to another institution. And students don't really think about this possibility. Your application could be deferred, and what we mean by that is it's us hitting the pause button on your application and saying, we need more information. So we're going to defer your application to the regular decision round. You will find out a final decision from us when all of the regular decision students find out. We're hitting the pause button for more information. What we mean by more information is twofold. One, we want more information about you, the applicant. What have you done during the first semester of your senior year? We want to see those grades. And number two, we need more information about what the rest of the applicant pool looks like and how you might fit into that applicant pool. So that's why we defer students. So those are the three possible outcomes. When we notify students in a couple of weeks what their decisions are, if you were a student who had been deferred from that early action round, you then will either get an up or down. You're either going to be admitted or denied, because we don't want to prolong this process any longer. Think about it like this. If you were an early action applicant, you might have applied as early as August 1st. And we're talking about now the middle of March. That's a long time to wait. And if TCU is where you have your heart set, we know that the anxiety can build, and we just want to be able to give you a final answer. That is in contrast to students who applied regular decision, who will also find out late next week. And their answer from us could be admit or deny, or we might place those students on a wait list. And if we place the student on the wait list, then we're saying we've offered all of the offers of admission that we have space for right now. We then need to track and see how students are responding to our offer of admission. And if we have space later on, then we'll start to sort of pick from the wait list. By the way, the most common question about the wait list is, what is the rank order? And the answer is there is no rank order, because we use the wait list to sort of fill in gaps. We have certain objectives that we're trying to meet with our incoming class every year. We want a certain number of in-state students versus out-of-state students. We want a certain number of members of our marching band. We want a certain number of anthropology majors and French majors and so forth. And we need to see, as those students who are depositing and telling us they plan to enroll are coming in, how are those various buckets being filled? And if we have shortcomings in any area, that's where we're going to go for the wait list. So in some years, a student who has identical credentials to a student in another year will have very different answers from us. So I hope that makes sense. Okay. The next question is, will high school sophomores be able to tour now that Texas is reopening? So I think that question is in response to the announcement from Governor Abbott yesterday that there will no longer be, starting next Wednesday, a statewide mask mandate. What that means is, though, that individual entities could still require masks. So I want to be really clear about that. When we say Texas is reopening, I think that that's going to be sort of a business by business decision. We, of course, have been open. And by the way, our students, current TCU students, have been on campus since the beginning of the school year. And our classes have been a combination of in-person and online classes, but the majority of the students have been on campus, and many of the on-campus activities have continued to take place. So, but to answer the question about high school sophomores, as I alluded to earlier, that's going to be after May 1. That's when we're going to really be focusing on the underclassmen coming to visit campus. Okay. Here's an interesting question by Angelina. Is TCU a school that normally accepts who are homeschooled in high school? And then also, what is the acceptance rate for international students? I don't know off the top of my head the answer to the second question. If you email us at frogmail@tcu.edu, I can guarantee you we're going to get you an answer to that. I just don't happen to know it off the top of my head, broken down by international versus domestic students. But to answer your question about homeschooled students, we have a lot of homeschool students at TCU, and they add great texture to the campus community. Their high school experience has been completely different. And so, and this sort of speaks to a larger point that we're looking to always bring in students who can help sort of challenge the culture in a really positive way by bringing that new perspective to TCU. So yeah, we love our homeschool students. What I would say though is while we are not requiring standardized tests for homeschool students, traditionally we probably have looked at standardized tests a little bit more carefully because we don't have experience necessarily from a homeschool situation for that particular student like we would a student coming from a high school where we see 10 or 20 applicants every year. So that's a little bit different. But absolutely, and we have seen, I have noticed just anecdotally over the last 5 to 10 years, more and more students from homeschool background choosing to apply to TCU. So that's great. Okay. There is a question about AP scores. What about AP scores? I think it's a really good question, especially right now with more and more schools going away from requiring SAT or ACT, and with the College Board announcement that they are going to be eliminating the subject tests. I'm not sure if you all are aware of that. The College Board made that announcement some weeks back. The SAT subject tests, or what were previously called the SAT-2s, or what when I was a high school student were called the achievement tests. These are all the same thing, 1 hour subject-specific exams. College Board has decided to do away with that. Now, there are lots of reasons why. The cynic in me would say it's because it's not a moneymaker for the College Board anymore, since most colleges now don't require the subject test. And where they do have a lot of resources developed in, and they generate a lot of revenue from, are the AP exams. So you've seen the College Board sort of move in that direction. It'll be interesting to see how colleges respond. The AP scores were never designed to be part of the admission review. The results of advanced placement tests are meant to provide students with college credit, because presumably you're demonstrating a vast array of knowledge in a college level course taken during high school. Once you do that by scoring, depending on the college and depending on the subject, a 3, a 4, or 5, you've sort of proven that you have a mastery of that material, and you should A, get credit, and B, be placed into a higher level course if you want to continue along that subject. So we do see AP scores, but from the standpoint of admission, I would say it's very similar to our do no harm policy with SAT and ACT. That is, if you have taken 5 or 6 AP tests before you apply to TCU and you've gotten a 5 on all of them, that's pretty impressive, and we'll take note of that. But if you didn't do that well, we're going to ignore it. We really aren't even going to look at it at all. So don't worry about how you do on those AP exams. This actually gets to another point about how we view curriculum. And that is that we really changed how we look at the curriculum for the purposes of admission about a year ago. We noticed that students were loading up on AP exams or AP classes, or the equivalent at your high school could be International Baccalaureate, or if your high school doesn't have AP or IB, maybe just taking the most advanced classes available. And that in and of itself is not a bad thing. We want students who challenge themselves. But we want students who challenge themselves appropriately. And I say that, and I'm really careful with my language when I talk to families about this, because there's a lot of stress that high school students experience. This is a really tough period in their life. In adolescence, things are changing all the time. There's a lot of pressure that they're under. And what you will hear invariably from college admission people like me is, we want you to take the most rigorous course load available. I happen to think that that's a really dangerous way to think, because not every student is capable of taking every AP class that's available. They just aren't. And I say that as somebody who would fall into that category. When I was in high school, I took AP classes in the subject areas that interested me and that I excelled in. And in other areas where they weren't, those subject areas that weren't my strong suit, I didn't take AP classes because I wouldn't have done well. And not only would I not have done well, I would have worried so much and focused so much attention on those classes that it would have dragged down my performance in the other areas where I did do well and they were of interest to me. So because of that, we wanted to see, okay, what happens if we sort of just assume that students who are taking an appropriate level of advanced courses, let's investigate to see what are the results of that once they get to college. Are they doing well? Are they persisting from first to second year? Are they graduating at the same rate? What's their cumulative GPA and all that stuff? And what we found through research that frankly was done by other colleges is that once you hit about 5 AP classes, that you have proven that you can do college level work, and there's very little marginal utility beyond that. And so we said, if that's true, then why would we reward students in the admission and scholarship process who take 12 and 15 and 18 APs? Shouldn't we be doing our part to lessen the anxiety of high school students? Again, if we know that if you take 5 AP classes and you do really well, you're going to succeed, and your success rate is going to be the same as somebody who took twice that many. Why would we penalize one set of students, or looking at it from another way? Why would we bump up one set of students? So we actually have changed our process. So we assess everybody's curriculum. We give a curriculum rigor a point assignment in our process, and we sort of max it out. If you took 5 or 6 AP classes, that's the max score you're going to get. Okay. Now, if you want to take more, that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. And again, as I mentioned, that could lead to advanced standing. It could lead to getting a lot of college credits. So that's good stuff. And if that's you, great. But we just don't want the message in the market to be the only way to get into TCU and to get a nice scholarship is to take every AP class under the sun, especially when that's really just not appropriate. So we feel really comfortable about that policy. Okay. Lori asks, when will TCU be returning to all in-person classes? This is a great question. Lori, our plan right now, we are planning for a fall semester that will be 100% in person. That is the goal. And of course, we wouldn't be doing our due diligence if we didn't have contingency plans in place. But for right now, all signs are pointing toward having all in-person classes 100% starting in the fall semester. We will be offering some online coursework over the summer for students. We found, sort of surprisingly, that there was a high demand for that last summer and through the intersession between the fall and the spring semester. So we'll continue to do that, but the coursework in the fall will be in person. Riley's asking, will you still require masks on campus? For the time being, as far as our process goes, in the Office of Admission and for classes, we're still requiring masks. That is, of course, subject to change based on what the university researches. And we're always going to be looking at this from a in a student-centered way and in a way that protects as many people in our community as possible. If the science tells us that we should continue to be supporting the use of masks in the classroom, then that's what we will do. But again, this remains to be seen, and I think the most important point is we're very excited that we're planning for in-person classes in the fall. Okay, so let's see. What other questions might you have? By the way, our website has lots of great information, because I'm seeing questions in the chat a lot about sort of specifics about AP and what AP results you need to have in order to get certain credits at TCU. That's on the admission page. So there's lots of great stuff there. Okay. Well, we're winding down our time together. I really appreciate all of you for being here. Let's see. Angela's asking about her daughter Macy. When should you schedule a visit to TCU? Macy's a junior at Pottsboro High School. Angela, I think that you can be looking toward the summer. Anytime that the student can come to campus. Well, let me take a step back. The best time to visit a college campus is when the college is in session, okay, and when the high school isn't in session. So we see our program just booming typically during breaks. When the high school is on spring break, but TCU is still in session, that's a popular time, or fall break similarly. Right now, because we're booked pretty solid, I think juniors should be looking sort of past May 1. So at the earliest possible time where it works into your schedule, we would love to have you on campus. The other thing I should note is while the schedule is full right now, we are seeing pockets open up now and again. A student planned to come visit, but they had to cancel for one reason or another. So you can sort of monitor our visit page, where the visit registration page, and you'll see from time to time there'll be openings. But I think more realistically, we're probably talking about summer and then even into the early fall. And if things move as we anticipate, and we are able to go into the fall semester and have 100% of the classes in person, and we're back to some semblance of normalcy, then we're going to have a lot more space in our visit program as well. Okay, Ashley's asking, I'm a transfer student. My deadline for fall 21 semester is June 1st. Even though I plan on submitting my application this month, there have still been thousands of students already accepted. Will this fact lower my chances of getting accepted into TCU? Ashley, great question. We love our transfer students. I think sort of little known fun fact about TCU is about 20% of our students, come through the transfer route. So we're a really transfer friendly school. The answer to your question is absolutely no disadvantage by waiting. We have lots and lots of space for transfer students. It's a much more straightforward process than is the entering first year application process. For transfer students, if you've got the GPA and everything else checks out, because we require students to submit what we call a good standing form from any previous institution attended. So if there are no sort of disciplinary violations or anything else like that, and you've got the GPA requirement, then you're pretty much going to get in. So that's fine. You can wait until you get further along in the semester or until your semester is over. If you meet that deadline, you'll hear back. We try to notify students within about 4 weeks, when possible, of completing the application. So we're sort of on a monthly basis rolling out decisions for our transfer students. Okay, what else do folks want to know? Okay, great question from Dung, who's our student in Vietnam. If your SAT score increases after being admitted, will your scholarship change? Excellent question. And the answer is it could. It absolutely could. So we traditionally will use the February test administration periods, February of senior year, as the last period that we will accept test results in order to sort of bump up scholarships. We can't do that indefinitely, so we have to have a cutoff point. But let's say a student was admitted in December under an early action plan, and they took a test in January or February of senior year, and they've already been admitted, and that score goes up. Maybe you hadn't submitted a test score to begin with, and now you want to submit it, or maybe you did submit the first round of scores, but now you've gotten a higher score. Yes, either we could give you a scholarship if you didn't have one before, or if you had one and the new test score moves you into a higher bracket, then we might also be able to do that, to give you a scholarship increase. So that's pretty exciting. Dan asks, is there a rubric for scholarship money that you use when standardized tests are not submitted? And Dan, that's a great question. Sort of. We do have this algorithm that we use for scholarships, but it's not sort of cut and dried where if you have X GPA, you are necessarily going to get a scholarship. There's some other factors that are used, but basically we're taking out the test score as a component, as a variable in that equation, and we're strengthening the other factors that we're looking at. Dung asks, will taking the SAT this May work? And unfortunately, if you've already been admitted and you're planning to enroll at TCU for the fall, we're not going to use the May test score in order to increase scholarship. But if you are a student who is not a high school senior and you're going to be hoping to enroll in subsequent terms, then absolutely go ahead and take the SAT in May if you're available. Marina asks, is there a limit of students or spaces in the university? And the answer is yes. We are looking to enroll a first-year class this fall of about 2,300 students. We anticipate having somewhere between 19 and 20,000 applications for first-year admission. So of course, we can't admit everybody. Now, we're going to admit more than 2,300 students because that's the end goal. And we know that some students who get into TCU will make the mistake of going somewhere else. Okay, that's a joke. There are lots of great colleges out there. But we know that not everyone's going to come to TCU. Usually in any given year, somewhere between 22 and 26% of students who are offered admission will accept our offer of admission. That percentage is what we call yield. So that's the percentage of students who accept our offer of admission. That's a very that's a nice yield to have when compared to sort of our peer set of schools. We feel really good about that. But that means in order to get to 2,300 students, if the yield is 23%, that means we need to admit 10,000 students. Of the 20,000 students who apply. If yield is a little bit higher, then we would have to admit fewer students. So this is both an art and a science, what we do in the Office of Admission. We've got lots of really sophisticated modeling that we work with based on history, but every group of students is different. And in some years, you're dealing with a global pandemic, which throws all of the statistical modeling out the window and is why a lot of us have lost a lot of hair in the last year. So at any rate, this is going to be the last question I get to because we're already over time, and I really everybody who has joined us. Jen is asking, will admission officers compare applicants who submit scores against applicants who don't from the same school? Great question. Great question. And the answer is no. We're not really comparing students against each other. We're really comparing students against themselves, what they could have done in the context of their own school. And because we are test optional, we're not going to penalize students who choose not to submit scores, even if they're students at the same school who chose to submit scores or who chose not to. Can't remember where I started with that sentence. But the bottom line is we're looking at every student individually and contextually. And so you could have students with identical credentials, test score not, and one has a test, one doesn't, and we're looking at them individually. And so in some cases, the two students will be admitted. In some cases, the two students wouldn't be admitted. And in some cases, one might and the other wouldn't, or vice versa. We're really looking at it because we look at this holistically. There are often many other elements that will end up carrying the day. So, okay, I just want to thank you all for joining me this evening. This has been a lot of fun. And again, I want to thank Rob and Amy and Mandy for their behind the scenes work over the last hour plus. Lots of admission information on our website, admissions.tcu.edu, and be on the lookout for another FaceTime live session in about a month's time. I hope everyone has a great evening. Best wishes, and go Frogs.